Metalforce is a Famicom game originally developed in 1993 but released in 1994 by Open Corporation. Yes, the same company who developed the unreleased cult classic Buzz and Wild Dog aka Coco Adventures. And within the obscure NES/Famicom games, you would mostly expect the games from Japan or United States. But actually, this game was released in my hometown country, South Korea, the country which was not too well known with the gaming industry. I mean, sure, South Korea had their own share of Japanese gaming consoles such as NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, Master System, you name it. Mostly went through with the big companies in South Korea such as Hyundai or Samsung for the licensee. But with that being said, it wasn't a huge success in South Korea as much as how they did in places like Japan or United States. So let's say stuff like Nintendo Famicom and all that kind of stuff, while it was big, but much like places like China or Taiwan, South Korea had their own fair share amount of bootleg counterparts and much cheaper in a sense. So naturally, the piracy took over and the actual licensed console didn't seem to have huge of a success. Nevertheless, much like Taiwanese or Chinese market, South Korean companies had their own ambition to develop their own original games on the hot-selling consoles. Companies such as Zemina, DAO, and of course even Open Corporation, while most of them, albeit were heavily influenced by the actual licensed property, unfortunately though, the games developed by these Korean companies in the beginning were the washed down version, copy, or demake of the more superior original counterparts. But companies like OpenCorp came out with the stuff that is often considered quite an underrated and obscure gems for today's standards, and in this case, Metalforce on the Famicom is one of them. The game is your basic side-scroller action platformer where you get to control, well, literally Metalforce, a space hero who's on a mission to save the Earth by defeating 7 bosses in total. It seems like at first the game is to be influenced by the style of Rockman or Mega Man. Even the poster itself claims that Korea's next challenger to Rockman. Yeah, you get the idea where they were coming from. Despite with the similar concept of Rockman, the spaceman going around killing all the evil robots on space, that's all it is to it in terms of being a quote-unquote Rockman clone, but the rest of them are actually quite original to say the least. Right up from the bat, this is a very linear side-scroller. You can clear one stage and move to the another. You don't have a level select screen or anything like that. The only choice of weapon you can use are 2 weapons consist of what they refer as laser sword and boomerang. Again, it's not like Rockman where you get the boss's ability after you defeat them. This game as it is pretty straightforward as you can see. Going back with the item, you also get to level up your item. What I mean by that is you can increase the amount of times you can shoot the item because in the beginning you can only shoot 1 at a time. So having a weapon upgrade is essential to say the least. To traverse the level, it's easier to deal with the certain enemies when you increase the amount of bullets that you get to shoot. You also get additional items as well, such as the energy chip that replenishes your energy bar by half. 1-up, well, it's self-explanatory. And you also have a continue chip, which is quite rare to say the least, but it allows you to continue after you get the game over. In the regular stance, normally if you get a game over, you go all the way back to the beginning. There's no continue codes or whatsoever. So continue chip is quite essential. And I would say you would need that chip in the beginning because for the first time playing through this game, it will be quite a challenge. First time playing through this, you might die a couple of times, and while it's not an insanely difficult game, believe me, but regardless though, there are fair share amount of gaming rage moments could occur here and there. To begin with, you get a maximum of 5 or 6 hits, which are not bad, but with certain enemy placements, the energy can drain quite quickly and sometimes it could lead to some of the frustrating death moments on a few occasions. It could drain them real fast, so you have to react quite quickly when enemies are nearby. And it's quite tricky to get off these enemies sometimes. Most of them are easy to kill, but sometimes you gotta have to use some strategies. Some enemies have a certain patterns or designated spot that you have to specifically kill them. They will block your bullets, and it's all about being patient to defeat on the right timing. Oftentimes they will fly right at you with the annoying pattern, but it's not too difficult to figure it out either. The only thing I truly hate about being damaged is when you get knocked back when you get hit. Which, let me tell you from the get-go, even on the good games like Castlevania or Ninja Gaiden, I honestly hate this damage mechanic. And particularly like those games, if you have a pit behind your back, then it's always a chore. On top of that, this game is certainly not generous when it comes to replenishing the health meter every time you clear the stage, and oftentimes I fell right into my doom from the start thinking that my energy bar is filled up for the next stage, but I realized it's the same drained energy bar where I previously got damaged on the last stage. Now let's talk about the controls, which are simple. Your usual D-pad to move, B to attack, and A to jump. The controls are surprisingly tight and responsive, and furthermore, you also have a momentum in your jumping ability, which makes it easier to control your character in terms of traversing the level design. You can also get to shoot your weapons while ducking, which is a good thing in order to kill some of the smaller enemies, but oftentimes I found it to be quite a struggle for certain level designs where you really want to use your weapon while you're on the ladder, but you just can't do that, and oftentimes it made me sweat just a bit, but that's just a minor problem, I would say. But overall, the controls as a whole are very, very well put together. Speaking of the levels and stages, the designers definitely balanced it out with each area, and surprisingly, they are quite memorable and fun to traverse around with the different fields. The stages can be huge with many variety of paths that you can explore to. Only about level 6 is where I felt like it was like a maze on the first try, but for the most part the level design is pretty good, and the basic control scheme once again helps it out for the enjoyment of the game. Most of the in-game graphics in this particular game is also very appealing throughout the levels as well. Being for the space game with having a dark space background for the most part, the game for the certain areas does indeed have a several vibrant color oftentimes, and it certainly is refreshing, I must say. Funny thing to keep in mind though, much like Buzz and Wild Dog, this game's sound engine rips straight from the Tiny Toon Adventures. Speaking of sounds, the soundtrack in this game is, well, it's a soundtrack alright, but I can't say it's a killer one. It definitely isn't out of the place with the game's atmosphere for sure. I must say they have a slight eerie feeling, but not on the creepy or depressing level to say the least, but I digress cause I ain't complaining too much though, cause it's not as bad as this. One fact though is that I can tell some tracks were taken straight from the other Korean game known as a block puzzle. Which I'm pretty certain that there might be a possibility it was developed by Open or probably Techline, who ripped the sound from the one and another, but who knows what. I must say however though, the bosses are quite lame. Not awful by no means, but I found it to be way too easy to deal with them once I figured out the pattern for each of them. And being that the enemies get stuck for a bit when you kind of sting them with the weapon, It's easy for the players to deal with the bosses and plan ahead for the next move. Well, I guess they put most of the difficulty on the actual stages and somewhat forgiving on the boss fights. And by the end of the day, once you defeat the boss, you've just completed one of the most underrated rare gem on the NES library that wasn't even commonly available universally back in the day. And even now, this game, despite with minor flaws, was a pleasant experience for me, and being for the unlicensed NES game, this surely is an impressive piece of work. The well-balanced controls, a good level design, kinda lame boss fights, but being that this game was meant for kids, it ain't off-putting on them, and certainly fits. And while not my cup of tea, granted, but it does have a fitting music for the overall atmosphere of this game's nature, and overall, I was proud of my own country to have a hidden NES jam title like this. It's a one heck of a game with solid mechanics overall, and I had a good time, and certainly you guys will. It's sad to see that this was OpenCorp's last game for the NES at least. Afterwards, they start to develop and focus more on the RPG-based or point-and-click strategy games on PC laterwards, until they went out of business in 1998. This game is certainly rare for its original copy, and I would say it's quite impossible. I would say the best bet for this game is to go for the reproduction card for MMC coded one, someone who's massively talented enough to make the actual Mapper 156 repro. Trust me, there are plenty of talented engineers out there who's able to make a repro, cause let me tell you, this game is not something that is easy to hold up. But if you ever get this game somehow, consider yourself lucky, because you will be in for the pleasant surprise and fun. This was Kevinhwsohn, signing out.